Welcome to The New Norm with Steve Norman. There is no hell like the school drop-off lane. At our elementary school, there was a drop-off loop, which was fine. But the main entrance to our middle school is on a busy street in our city's downtown district. So you have to wait for a spot to open up along the curb, squeeze your car in, drop off your student, and wait for an opening to get back into traffic. It should be relatively simple. Pull up, drop off, move on. There's no reason this can't be done with all the efficiency of paratroopers jumping out of a moving plane. 1, 2, 3. This is all I expect from the parents and guardians in front of me in the drop-off lane. 1, 2, 3, move. If it's 1, 2, 3, 4, you might hear me mumble, come on, or let's go. Or for up to 10 whole seconds and exasperated, it's not hard, people. It's not like those extra 5 seconds are throwing a huge wrench in my day. I just hate waiting. Now, fortunately, the advent of technology has made some waiting easier. The app will tell you how many minutes it will take for your rideshare driver to get to your location. The app will tell you how many minutes you'll be stuck in traffic on your commute. The app will tell you how many parties need to be seated in front of you before you get a table. We're still waiting, but at least we know approximately how long the wait will be. And depending on the scenario, we might change our plans because the wait is just too long. Here's the wrinkle. The Bible is filled with stories of people who are waiting. And what's worse, God never tells them how long they'll need to do so. Consider the story of Joseph as told in the last chapters of Genesis. Here's a little backstory. Joseph is the 11th of Jacob's sons. Jacob gives him a special coat that marks him as the favorite son. And at the age of 17, Joseph has a series of dreams that one day he'll be a person of status and influence, and his brothers will bow down to him in honor. Now, this revelation doesn't endear him to his 10 older brothers. It makes things worse. And later in the story, those same brothers kidnap him and sell him into slavery. They tear his famous robe, they dip it in blood and show it to their father, leading him to believe that his son is dead. Now, Joseph is trafficked to Egypt and employed by a royal official, the captain of the guard. He's accused of a crime that he didn't commit, and he ends up in prison. So we pick up the story in Genesis chapter 39. It says, Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. And the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with the two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. And the captain of the guard assigned to them Joseph, and he attended them. And after they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each had a dream with a meaning of its own. And when Joseph came to the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there's no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer and the baker go on to explain their dreams, and Joseph interprets them both. It's good news for the cupbearer. In 3 days, he'll be restored to his job at the palace. It's bad news for the baker. In 3 days, he's going to be executed. And Joseph's one request for the cupbearer is that when he returns to the palace, he advocates for Joseph's release from prison. But the cupbearer forgets. 2 full years will pass before Pharaoh has a dream he doesn't understand. And the cupbearer finally connects the dots and has Joseph brought from prison. Joseph tells Pharaoh what the dream means, and Pharaoh installs Joseph as second in command over the entire nation. Later, when there's a famine in Joseph's homeland, his brothers come to Egypt to buy food. They don't recognize Joseph, and they won't until later in the story. But in this moment, they bow before him in respect. It's been 22 years from the moment Joseph had his dreams to the moment they are fulfilled. 22 years of waiting. Here are some important lessons I'm learning from Joseph's story, especially his season of waiting in prison. Lesson 1, waiting reframes my view of God. When I'm stuck, I ask God to do things for me. Like Joseph, I have dreams that I believe are from God that haven't yet been realized. So I ask God for favor or deliverance or help or movement. I ask for God's power to be leveraged on my behalf for my agenda. My guess is that Joseph prayed that too. God, please get me out of prison. God, I don't belong here. God, please get me home. God, please let the cupbearer remember me. But God doesn't answer any of those prayers. Not immediately, anyway. God is working on a different timeline than Joseph. And even though God doesn't act for Joseph, he is clearly with Joseph. God doesn't release Joseph from prison. He joins him there. And when he does, Joseph thrives in prison. Everything he touches succeeds. And maybe the reason that we struggle in the waiting is that we can't imagine a world where anything good happens in captivity. But for Joseph, it does. And for us, it can. And it will. Waiting reminds me that even when it seems that God isn't for me, God is still with me. And if I let it be, that will always be enough. Lesson 2, waiting reframes my view of others. Joseph's time in prison transforms how he sees the people around him. In his teens, Joseph sees people as obstacles, barriers to his success, hurdles he needs to clear in order to achieve his ambition. But in prison, he has both the time and the margin to see people as opportunities to declare the goodness of God, to encourage others in dark times, and to lift their heads in the midst of their despair. It takes some time, but when Joseph is waiting for his dream to be realized, he's able to help others lean into their dreams. And when he does, the cupbearer gets hope. And the baker, even though he gets bad news, he gets time. He gets 72 hours to get his affairs in order and say his goodbyes. The Pharaoh gets wisdom to address the coming famine. Our one gift of waiting is us realizing that we're not the only ones who are waiting. And maybe if you feel like you're in a prison season, maybe you're not there for you. Maybe you, like Joseph, is there for someone else. Maybe our time in this season can allow us to be a gift to others who need it. And lesson 3, waiting reframes my view of freedom. Consider the two following terms for freedom: autonomy and liberty. Autonomy means I get to do what I want when I want. I'm free to do whatever. When Joseph is stuck waiting, he's at the mercy of God and others. But even though he lacks autonomy, even though he's lacked in prison, he is experiencing liberty. He's beginning to get disentangled from the arrogance and the self-centeredness he displayed as an adolescent. And by the end of his time in prison, he's freed from ego, from self-promotion, from self-preservation in a way that he wasn't before. Too often in seasons of waiting, I focus on being freed from unpleasant circumstances rather than being freed from my own twisted ambition. Maybe waiting would get easier if we could understand that patience is a pathway to maturity. Richard Rolle, a 14th century English contemplative writer, says this: anyone who is really patient will not want to have their own way in this world so that they can have it more fully in the next. In no respect can the devil be more quickly conquered than in patience. This the devil deeply loathes, because he is able to keep vigil and fast and endure agony more than any other creature is capable of doing. But patience and love he cannot tolerate. Patience. Humble, faith-filled, submissive patience is an act of spiritual combat and resistance. It declares that God's provision and timing are good, and that even if I don't get what I want precisely when I want it, it doesn't mean that God has abandoned me. This is all part of what I'm learning on my quest to become the new norm. The New Norm is brought to you by Winning at Home. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.